Good afternoon, everyone. This is another episode of Confronting the False Concept of Race. This is actually part number 5 today. And I welcome you back and I thank you for your support. Appreciate any support you can give me as I endeavor to speak God's truth to Satan's lies. And the lie that we have been confronting is the false concept of race. And as promised, I'm going to read to you now the American Anthropological Association's statement on race. I promised that I would read that, and that's what I'm going to do. This particular statement was made public, put out there on May 17, 1998. I note the date because I turned 35 on that day, and I'm about to turn 60 now. May 17th, 1963 is when I was born, and I was born in Compton, California. All right. Now there's a statement here to begin the statement, which is as follows. The following statement was adopted by the Executive Board of the American Anthropological Association, acting on a draft prepared by a committee of representative American anthropologists. It does not reflect a consensus of all members of the AAA, the American Anthropological Association, as individuals vary in their approaches to the study of race, and every time that race is used in this statement, it is in quotations. Important to notice that. We believe that it represents generally the contemporary thinking and scholarly positions of a majority of anthropologists. Now, there's two reasons why they would have to make a statement like this. One reason being that the nuances, the minute details might be different among different anthropologists, and such individuals like their own little ways of thinking on things. But probably more than that, what other reason might there be why it would make a statement that it does not reflect a consensus of all members of the American Anthropological Association? I wonder what reason that would be. I would say to you and suggest that the reason for that, simply put, is the same reason why, well, as you listen to me, perhaps you agree that what I am saying and you understand it to be the truth. But perhaps you are more fond of the lie that we are confronting, or some version of it, and that gives you cause to not agree maybe on some points of what I say. I'm simply trying to present this in a very straightforward, factual way. But even the anthropologists can't agree, because mythology becomes entrenched in the thinking of human beings, and it becomes very hard to break free of it. So we are trying to do that, trying to get your thoughts focused on the truth and let the truth take away the lie. So now we're going to go ahead and read this statement in its entirety for our session today. In the United States, both scholars and the general public have been conditioned to viewing human races as natural and separate divisions within the human species based on visible differences. With the vast expansion of scientific knowledge in this century, however, it has become clear that human populations are not unambiguous, clearly demarcated, biologically distinct groups. Evidence from the analysis of genetics, DNA is what we're talking about here, indicates that most physical variation, about 94%, lies within so-called racial groups. Did you catch that? Most physical variation, about 94%, occurs within racial groups, within so-called racial groups. Conventional geographic racial groupings differ from one another only in about 6% of their genes. This means that there is greater variation within racial groups than between them. In neighboring populations, there is much overlapping of genes and their phenotypic or physical expression, what people look like. Throughout history, however, different groups have come into contact. Whenever different groups have come into contact, they have interbred. The continued sharing of genetic materials has maintained all of humankind as a single species from the beginning. They are saying the continued sharing of genetic materials has maintained. Another way of saying that is confirmed all of humankind as a single species. Physical variations in any given trait tend to occur gradually rather than abruptly over geographic areas. And because physical traits are inherited independently of one another, knowing the range of one trait does not predict the presence of others. For example, skin color varies largely from light in the temperate areas in the north to dark in the tropical areas in the south. Its intensity is not related to nose shape or hair texture. Dark skin may be associated with frizzy or kinky hair, or curly or wavy or straight hair, all of which are found among different indigenous peoples in tropical regions. These factors render any attempts to establish lines of division among biological populations both arbitrary and subjective. Arbitrary and subjective. It's just what you might think. Doesn't reflect fact. That's what they're saying there. And just understand that traits do not necessarily go together. Noses and hair and skin color do not necessarily go together. Some other points I was going to make mention of here. Let's see. Okay, that suffices. We'll go to the next paragraph now. Historical research has shown that the idea of race has always carried more meanings than mere physical differences. Indeed, physical variations in the human species have no meaning except the social ones that humans put on them. So looking at this from a strictly biological standpoint, there's nothing at all that skin color can say about anyone's character or ability to learn, intelligence, or anything like that. Those ideas are imposed by society. That's what they're saying. Today, scholars in many fields argue that race, as it is understood in the United States of America, was a social mechanism invented during the 18th century to refer to those populations brought together in colonial America, the English and other European settlers, the conquered Indian peoples, and those peoples of Africa brought in to provide slave labor. And of course, when they say Indians, they're talking about North and South American Indians, not continental Indians from the continent of India. So, social construct. From its inception, the modern concept of race was modeled after an ancient theorem of the great chain of being, which posited natural categories on a hierarchy established by God or nature. Thus, race was a mode of classification linked specifically to peoples in the colonial situation. It subsumed a growing ideology of inequality devised to rationalize European attitudes and treatment of the conquered and enslaved peoples. Proponents of slavery, in particular during the 19th century, used race to justify the retention of slavery. The ideology magnified the differences among Europeans, Africans, and Indians, established a rigid hierarchy of socially exclusive categories, underscored and bolstered unequal rank and status differences, and provided the rationalization that inequality was natural or God-given. The different physical traits of African Americans and Indians became markers or symbols of their status differences. As they were constructing U.S. society, leaders among European Americans fabricated the cultural, behavioral characteristics associated with each race, linking superior traits with Europeans and negative and inferior ones to blacks and Indians. Numerous arbitrary and fictitious beliefs about the different peoples were institutionalized and deeply embedded in American thought. We can't get around this, folks. This is what they're saying. Facts of the case, this was fabricated. This was based on numerous and arbitrary, fictitious beliefs and was institutionalized into American thought. Next paragraph. Early in the 19th century, the growing fields of science began to reflect the public consciousness about human differences. Differences among the racial categories were projected to their greatest extreme when the argument was posed that Africans, Indians, and Europeans were separate species. See how that, see? Do you see? Once that term got hijacked, like we talked about, then it was an easy step to apply it toward people. Argument was posed that Africans, Indians, and Europeans were separate species, with Africans the least human and closer taxonomically to apes. Ultimately, race as an ideology about human differences was subsequently spread to other areas of the world. Thank you, United States of America, for giving birth to this concept and promulgating it around the world. It became a strategy for dividing, ranking, and controlling colonized people used by colonial powers everywhere. But it was not limited to the colonial situation. In the latter part of the 19th century, it was employed by Europeans to rank one another and to justify social, economic, and political inequalities among their peoples. During World War II, the Nazis, under Adolf Hitler, enjoined the expanded ideology of race and racial differences and took them to a logical end: the extermination of 11 million people of inferior races, Jews, Gypsies, Africans, and so forth, and other unspeakable brutalities of the Holocaust. Race, all right, here it is, folks. Please understand from a cultural frame of reference where these things come from, who they keep company with. Adolf Hitler was only taking it to its logical extreme. That's all he was doing. Race thus evolved as a worldview. Now, I had some ancestors who came out of Germany during this time. It was not much better to be Jewish in these United States of America than it was in Germany at that time. In fact, there were a number of Americans that sided on this point with the Nazis. And so my ancestors would not speak of being Jewish. They simply would say, we're from Germany. Race thus evolved as a worldview, a body of prejudgments that distorts our ideas about human differences and group behavior. Racial beliefs constitute myths about the diversity in the human species and about the abilities and behavior of people, homogenized into racial categories. The myths fused behavior and physical features together in the public mind, impeding our comprehension of both biological variations and cultural behavior, implying that both are genetically determined. Racial myths bear no relationship to the reality of human capabilities or behavior. Scientists today find that reliance on such folk beliefs about human differences in research has led to countless errors. They're admitting that the cultural misconception even affects the researcher's mind because he's already got it in his head what he's going to find. At the end of the 20th century, we now understand that human cultural behavior is learned, conditioned into infants beginning at birth, and always subject to modification. No human is born with a built-in culture or language. Our temperaments, dispositions, and personalities, regardless of genetic propensities, are developed within sets of meanings and values that we call culture. Studies of infant and early childhood learning and behavior attest to the reality of our cultures informing who we are. It is the basic tenet of anthropological knowledge that all normal human beings have the capacity to learn any cultural behavior. The American experience with immigrants from hundreds of different language and cultural backgrounds who have acquired some version of American culture traits and behavior is the clearest evidence of this fact. Moreover, people of all physical variations have learned different cultural behaviors and continue to do so as modern transportation moves millions of immigrants around the world. How people have been accepted and treated within the context of a given society or culture has a direct impact on how they perform in that society. The racial worldview was invented to assign some groups to perpetual low status, while others were permitted access to privilege, power, and wealth. The tragedy in the United States has been that the policies and practices stemming from this worldview succeeded all too well in constructing unequal populations among Europeans, Native Americans, and peoples of African descent. Given what we know about the capacity of normal humans to achieve and function within any culture, we conclude that present-day inequalities between so-called racial groups are not consequences of their biological inheritance, but products of historical and contemporary social and economic, educational, and political circumstances. So there we have it, folks. That was the American Anthropological Association's statement on race from May 17, 1998. If you'd like to look at some more similar things, for instance, if you would like further information on human biological variations, see the statement prepared and issued by this same group in 1996 on the topic. So that's the scientists. Before we conclude today, just to bring it back around and connect to the biblical truth, the truth of the Bible exposes this lie. Just like from a biological frame of reference, these scientists are exposing the lie. Again, look to Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 and 27. Also note in that account of the creation of everything, the word kind that we've talked about in verse 11, 20, 21, 24, and 25. And then look at 26 and 27 with regard to man. Look at the story in Numbers 12 where Aaron and Miriam bring a complaint against Moses because he was married to an African woman. God puts them in their place right now. And if ever there was a time for God to say, here's what you need to think about this, yes, we need to divide up by color. No, he doesn't say that. In the generations, as you read in Genesis 10, 4, 20, 31, it's nations, language, families, languages, lands, cultural things that are used to distinguish between people, not the color of their skin, or how curly their hair is, or how big their nose is, or what their eyes look like, or anything like that. In Acts 17:26, the Apostle Paul, the Jew, tells a group of Gentiles listening to him that we are one blood. This is what the Bible says. To sum up, in the Genesis creation account, every living thing, including human beings, is made according to its kind. The Hebrew word translated here is the word min. This word, as we have seen, means a kind, form, or sort. In terms of humankind, there is but one, occurring in a really quite limited variety phenotypically, and, as we shall see, in an even more limited variety genotypically. The Apostle Paul, a Jew, confirmed this truth when speaking to an audience of Gentiles on Mars Hill when he said, we are of one blood, or we come from one man. According to the Bible, in these and other passages, there is no such thing as the concept of race. That is, unless all we are talking about is one race, which is to say, the human race. And the whole concept of mixture is predicated on purity. And what can any human possibly purely be except human? I'll use a different analogy on that, a spiritual one, when we look at this next time. We must avoid the erroneous teachings of men, brethren. Racism in any form is an erroneous teaching dividing up the human race according to skin color, not biblical either. All right, there's more to come, much more to come, but this will conclude for part 5 for today. Thank you for watching my channel. Please contribute to the support of my work. There are means whereby you can do that listed on my page. I would appreciate that very much. And I thank you. God be with you all. Much love and respect. Bye for now.